Hello everyone and welcome to November's Comfort Book Club discussion of Nature Tales for Winter Nights, an anthology edited by Nancy Campbell. As always, I'm joined by my mum Donna.
Hello everyone.
And we've been really looking forward to today's chat,
We
haven't
really
we?
have, yes.
Thank you so much as always to the Comfort Book Club readers who sent in voice messages to add to our discussion. As always, we really appreciate your messages, and those are added in at the end of our chat so we can respond to you then. But it's definitely an appropriate day to be talking about nature tales for winter nights,
and having a nice hot cup of tea with us
I
here.
hope you've got a nice hot beverage with you so you can enjoy getting cozy as you listen to us. There's quite a thick layer of frost on the ground still outside,
Yes.
where it's a sunny day, but where it's still shady, there's definitely frost still there, so it's a cold
really
day.
It's cold.
Yes.
yes.
But to dive into our discussion, I really loved the variety of the nature tales
It was amazing.
that she chose for this. It really was such a diverse range. We were talking together and we were saying there was a real variety of different places, different times in history, different experiences of winter itself, and different voices too that contributed to this anthology, and I really enjoyed that.
I did too. Everything from like non-fiction pieces to myths being explored. I loved the Inuit myths that were brought in and things like that. It was fabulous.
Yeah, and
fabulous
there were poems, like really short pieces as well as longer stories and extracts. Some were really quite long, in fact.
They were.
So there was a variety of structure and length as well.
Yes.
That was included. And I enjoyed that because it kind of felt like a bit of a surprise every time you turned to a new tale.
It did. It really, you wonder, okay, where am I going next? Because there were such changes in location, with winter, of course, being the theme.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was something I enjoyed about this anthology. I think I've read quite a few seasonal anthologies in the past, and one of the things that I thought was quite different about this one was that strong emphasis on the natural world at winter time. It really wasn't about the human life interior, the life indoors during winter, which a lot of winter stories often are about. They're about gathering around the fire.
Yes.
But in this, the focus was much more obviously on the outside world. And I think it's quite natural, at least for me, to think of winter as quite a barren time in nature.
Yes.
But don't you feel this anthology sort of changes your perspective?
It did,
on that?
absolutely. You realise really not at all. That was very interesting, wasn't it?
Yes, and there's this richness to the natural world, even in the winter, that is described so well in this anthology. And we talked about the variety already, but I also thought the variety of nature showed too was really good. Like, we had everything from animals like burrowing in the ground, burrowing under snow, to the northern lights being written about, and the amazing night skies.
And the meteorites.
A meteor shower at the end.
Yes.
I think that those two sort of final pieces had the northern lights, had meteor showers in them, and really brought to life the night sky that's so incredible about winter. But we really went from the earth to the sky and everything in between.
We did.
In the anthology. And it just showed the richness to the nature tales of winter.
Absolutely, and how much people have been attracted to experiencing the extremes of winters, but also to telling stories about them too.
Yes.
I loved that.
Yes,
I loved
me
the
too.
variety of voices, but also the way that they're there throughout history, and the way it's being taken, and the way it's still going on.
Yes.
Some of these were very contemporary, in fact.
Yes, I thought that was a really interesting mix. We had much older writers from many, many years ago, but also newer ones as well.
Yes.
Did anything surprise you in this anthology, would you say? Was there one of the tales that especially surprised you in some aspect of winter?
Well, I was fascinated by the Travellers'
Oh,
tale.
yes.
Yes. And that was by Damien Lebas.
Yeah.
And he was driving, I think, from the sort of Hampshire, Dorset border, and was going down to Cornwall.
Yes.
So it was contemporary. It felt present day. And he was talking about some of the really the things that were made during Christmas time.
The harvesting of the holly.
The harvesting of the holly.
Yes.
And I had never realised that actually this was particularly something that the Romany people knew how to bind the holly into wreaths and things. It was fascinating. And I just started thinking about that, and I'm thinking how painful a job that would be, you know, because you know how holly can really prick.
Yes, I know.
And you can just imagine that the talent involved in doing that. But it was just another world, and it took you right into that world.
Yes,
it was
I enjoyed that.
What about
really
you?
Well written.
Was there anything that really stood out for you that was surprising?
Yes, I was especially surprised by the extract called The Golden Bough, which was about mistletoe and about how the actual stem of mistletoe goes a kind of yellowy golden colour.
I didn't know
like
that
it all
either.
Sort of changes colour, and I had no idea about that. And it was a very interesting extract all about the kind of mythology behind mistletoe too.
Yes.
And but also there was a little bit in it when he talked about French peasants. Was it in Normandy or
Breton?
Maybe. Yes.
Yeah.
And they would hang bunches of mistletoe on the door, and in the summer they would all go yellow.
Yes.
And I had no idea about that.
No, I didn't.
I've never seen mistletoe much, I suppose. We don't get it in the orchards that we know around here.
No, I haven't seen it. No, ever actually. Even in Dorset and stuff, I never saw it.
And I always picture it like this, the Christmas time version of mistletoe with the green leaves.
Absolutely.
And the sort of pearly white berries.
Yeah.
And so that surprised me because I'd never known that it goes this yellow. And hence why it can be called the golden bough.
It's fascinating.
Yes. So that surprised me, and I really enjoyed that. But there were lots of things that surprised me, I think, in this anthology.
There was some very good gardening tips in one of the pieces too, and what to plant and things like that. And I found that fascinating as well, because they were.
It was very ancient advice, actually.
It was.
An old extract, that
yes.
one, but still applicable in some ways.
It was.
And I enjoyed that as well. But I also really liked, well, before I talk more about what I liked, the stories I liked, I did want to ask you if you had a real favourite, if you had some favourites from the anthology.
Well, I really liked the one about the holly wreaths.
Yes.
You know, I thought that was wonderful.
Yes.
I love the Inuit.
Yes, the folklore.
And of course it was nice to come across in an anthology that is full of surprises and full of very rich things that you're learning about. And it's always nice to come across something like a poem, like the John Clare poem you recognise.
Something familiar.
Like
Orlando.
That was what I was going to say. I really enjoyed reading Orlando again. And, you know, Virginia Woolf's novel is something that I think a lot of people have very sort of visual impressions of.
Yes.
And the whole bit about the ice going...
The Thames being frozen.
Yes.
I know.
Yes.
It was so visual.
It is very visual. Yeah. And of course you get the magic of the words and of this extreme winter that there was in that time. And also, the way she describes what happens when it all pretty much overnight melted and people being lost, being swept out to sea. It was quite moving, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And that's a very striking passage.
It is. And I loved finding that. It was familiar to me, and finding it, making me remember that passage specifically from the book.
Yes.
So it's just like The Wind in the Willows. There was also the passage from The Wind in the Willows about...
when they get lost in the woods, when Mole gets lost in the woods.
Mole gets... and how scary it is and everything.
That's
and that brings that back to. It was very atmospheric. So I think it was a mix of both the new and the old that I especially loved, and the familiar and the completely unfamiliar too.
Yes, yes. I think that's really true. One piece that was a real standout for me was one about the murmuration of starlings by Tim D, I think it was.
Yes.
And that was such a gorgeously written piece.
Amazing.
I thought it was just incredible, and it made me long to see.
I was going to say, didn't it make you long to be there, to see that?
It did.
Was it in Essex or Norfolk? It was somewhere like that.
Or Somerset, I thought.
Oh, Somerset, that's right. Yes.
But it just sounded incredible, and it was just the most magical description of a murmuration. And you think that is one of the sights of winter. I mean, talking about the skies of winter, we often think about the night sky.
Of course.
We went out just last night just to look at the stars, because they were really clear last night, really beautiful. And that is such a charm of winter. But also you realise the skies in the day too, with the amazing sunrises and sunsets, and also being able to see something like a murmuration like that would be incredible. I've only ever seen little ones.
Absolutely, and I hadn't realised, did you, that actually they don't last that long. I didn't realise they were sort of a fairly orchestrated moment, and I loved that description. He writes brilliantly, honestly.
He does, and it made me really want to read more of his work. And I think talking about the aspect of surprise in this book, which I really enjoyed, on the one sense, not knowing quite what was coming next, where in the world we'd be going next. I enjoyed that level of variety, but what I also enjoyed was when I really liked a piece, I would go and look up more about the author in the back of the book and the little bibliography section. And so that kind of led me off to exploring other things. And I realised the extract I really loved by Tim D is from his book The Running Sky, which I already had.
Yes.
And I thought, I must be sure to read this, because
beautiful.
it made me really want to read more of his work.
Yeah.
So that was happy to sort of be reminded of this book and feel like, I really must read that. And I always think a good anthology does that. It makes you want to go off and explore more from a writer that you discover through it.
I really agree. I think this book did that brilliantly, and perhaps directed you to work by an author that wasn't perhaps the most typical one. I mean, we've read some of, the very last one was by Elizabeth Burnett.
That wasn't the very last one. I think it was like the penultimate.
Yes,
one.
You're right.
Elizabeth
It was.
Jane Burnett. Yes. Yes, and I know it made you want to explore more of her work too.
Yes.
And some of the pieces chosen were from very typical works like The Wind in the Willows or Orlando, very famous ones. But it was also nice to have some chosen either from lesser known works of writers,
or a different, like I think of her as being a poet.
Yes.
And of course she also writes very well with prose.
She writes quite a lot of prose
as
well.
Yes. So it was lovely to read that piece.
Yes, I agree. And another piece that I really loved, I know you liked it a lot too, but it was a real favourite as well, was the one, I can't remember what it's called, but it was about witch hazel.
Oh, yes. Gathering.
The Witch Hazel Gatherer by Edwin Way Teale.
I loved that one. In fact, we both read it and had to discuss it with each other.
Yes. Again, I thought it was a really well-written piece, and it was quite a modern piece, actually, too. I was surprised by how many modern pieces I liked. I didn't actually know the writers.
No. That was an American naturalist, obviously. Yes,
I think so. And he described going along with a gatherer of witch hazel in Connecticut, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And to make the sort of, witch hazel balms and lotions and things like that, they're so appropriate, but the actual witch hazel was gathered in a very sort of traditional way, and he described this process. And I loved that bit. In fact, I realised a lot of my other sort of favourite extracts often involved trees. Like I loved the
Yes.
witch hazel
Yeah.
one.
The holly too that I
Yes,
liked.
exactly.
Yeah, with the Romany. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And also the one about the holly trees planted.
Oh, that was amazing. So they could find their way in the winter.
in more ancient times when people walked a lot more, they could find their way through the markings of the trees. They were deliberately planted as guides. And I found that really interesting.
Well, I think with that witch hazel one, I just thought, when I was a child, and I don't know if it's still as popular, but if the minute you fell over, and I mean, I did this with you, it's all witch hazel on a bruise and everything. And when you learnt how many plants needed to be taken, you thought, gosh, it's amazing it's not £30 a bottle for witch hazel. Obviously, it's very diluted. You have it, but it was really fascinating. Something that's an everyday thing, and you learn something entirely new about it.
Yes, and I liked how that piece led you right to the brink of winter in a way, like right to the edge, because it was written in March.
Yes,
and in it you have the hope of spring just burgeoning at the end of the piece too. And I really liked that. And I have to say I really enjoyed her introduction to the book.
That was very interesting.
Which I thought was such a nice piece in itself.
Yeah.
And in it Nancy Campbell described how she went on a kind of writer's retreat in some remote castle somewhere.
Yes.
And read all these books in sort of, research for this book. And it sounded so cozy and wonderful. But also she talked about the process of reading all these extracts about winter made her hopeful for spring too.
Yes.
And I think that is an element of winter, is you're aware that spring is coming.
Yes.
And you're hopeful for it too.
Yes.
And I liked how that witch hazel piece really incorporated like the birth of spring within the sort of dregs of winter.
Absolutely. It was so beautifully done, and I think I really loved her piece too. And what I loved is how all these other writers who were there on this retreat would gather around the fire and tell the things about and recommend books to one another, but talk about what they'd read and were reading.
And writing too.
And writing, of course.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating, wasn't it? Just having that picture of them in the castle, and she did that beautifully.
Yes, exactly.
Wonderful.
So I really enjoyed that introduction too. All right, well now let's hear from some of the Comfort Book Club readers who sent in messages. So I'll start with my first one from Eriko. Let's listen to Eriko's message.
Hello, my name is Eriko. This beautiful anthology to me told such fascinating diversity of human experiences with nature. For example, I really like the story of Greenland, A Harsh Winter, where it describes vividly how winter storm can be both a source for wonder and beauty, but at the same time such destructive force. And also there is the Vincent van Gogh's emotional letter to his brother, where he writes, even in his darkest moment, a good 6-hour walk in rain and snow cheered him and calmed him more than anything. So nature also heals us. Reading this anthology made me realize what a great teacher nature is to us. It teaches us to be patient and resilient, but also to be playful and imaginative. And above all, simply be happy. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Eriko.
Thank you, Eriko.
And yes, I love thinking about those different lessons that nature teaches us, and there were real contrasts in this book. Some that you referenced very harsh lessons and sort of really battling with those elements of nature and winter that are so dangerous often. But also, like you said, it can also heal us. There's a real restorative aspect to nature, which really came up in some of the pieces as well. I loved the one in France where she sits under a box tree and is sort of really like rejuvenated by that. And like you said, also lessons of playfulness.
Yes.
That made me think of the very first story in this one, set in Japan, where she builds the sort of snow mountain, and she sort of wants it to last, and sadly it doesn't. Though not through her, not through her fault. Yes, but I love that there was so much creativity in that story with the poems that they make up to describe, and that element of like creativity and playfulness and interacting with the season too.
And I found there was one bit where it was a Robert Louis Stevenson bit where there was some of the tedium of what he felt was really boring time spent in the Alps, because he felt that there was obviously not enough excitement, not enough change in the landscape. It was one village to another was the way he described it when you were walking around.
Yes,
and that amused me too.
It does, yes, I know.
Yeah,
He was hopefully maybe taught some patience on his road to recovery as he was an invalid, wasn't he?
That's right.
Yes. But yes, I know I found that funny too, because I think so many of us would think how romantic to be off in the Swiss Alps, you know, how lovely. And his piece was about how dull that was.
Yes.
But yes, thank you, Eriko, for your message.
You,
so glad that you enjoyed the anthology. And let's listen from another Comfort Book Club reader now, Myriam. We'll listen to Myriam's message.
Hi, Miranda, Donna, and my Comfort Book Club friends. Myriam from California here. Thank you for recommending Nature Tales for Winter Nights, as it has something for everybody. I've never been able to read multiple books at a time, and I have to finish one before starting another. This was a first for me, and I would read a few stories every evening at bedtime. Ms. Campbell put together a very diverse selection of stories, from authors of hundreds of years back to younger, more modern-day writers. According to most of the writers, winter can be a double-edged sword, as they vividly describe the incredible beauty of the season, yet it brings with it the perils as well, like in Sea Storm, where those 4 kayaks capsized and the people died. I had trouble understanding The Shadow by Charlotte Bronte, and I hope someone can explain it to me. I reread it a few times, but my poor little brain didn't quite understand the last few paragraphs, so I hope I get some help here. Anyway, this book is truly the perfect cozy winter read. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Myriam.
Thank you, Myriam.
Yes, The Shadow by Charlotte Bronte. That was an extract from Villette, one of her quite long novels. And I can see why it would be a bit confusing.
Yes. If you hadn't read it before, or you hadn't read it for a long time, it's some of the characters that's mentioned in that extract, like Dr. John.
Yes.
And that makes sense if you've read the whole novel, but you wouldn't be expected to really understand that.
No,
I think.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
But if you're wondering about those few paragraphs at the end, she thinks she sees a ghostly presence of a nun. So she thinks she sees a nun's ghost, and this ghost has made an appearance previously in the book. In some ways, I thought that was maybe one of the weakest ones in the book. I didn't feel there was that element of the natural world so much. I mean, ghosts are always a part of winter stories.
Yes.
So there was that.
There was that part of it. But yes, and I also felt I could understand why it seemed like a little bit harder to understand when you didn't know the whole book.
Yes. But I'm glad you enjoyed the other extracts. And I agree too. It's a nice book to read, just a few sort of stories a night. It's one to sort of savour, isn't it?
It is, definitely, I think. Yes. You want to take each bit in and think about it. I think it works very well like that. Yeah. It's not one to sort of race through, for sure.
No, exactly. Yeah. So I'm glad you enjoyed reading it in that way. And thank you very much again for your message, Myriam. And let's hear from the last Comfort Book Club reader, Laura. Laura sent in a message as well, so we'll listen to what she had to say.
Hello, Miranda. Hello, Donna. This is Laura from Italy. Nature Days for Winter Nights has been such a lovely way to enter a magic winter atmosphere. It is not just a collection of winter stories. I consider it more as a sort of commonplace book about winter. I was absolutely fascinated by its variety of texts and authors.
one text in particular transporting me to a different dimension of deep communion with nature. It is Encounter of the Road of Hercules, Al Maritime, by Charlotte Duquesne. She describes seeing a man sitting by a box tree while walking up the ancient path of Hercules, but then she realizes the man is just a piece of wood, an optical illusion. I do love what she writes then. If you keep still, are quiet in these wide places, not afraid, let your body instruct you, you can come to the archaic knowledge of this world. You can know you are connected to life in ways you cannot speak. So incredibly beautiful and poetic. Thank you, Miranda, for this wonderful celebration of the beauty of winter.
Oh, thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. That was wonderful. Yes.
Yes.
I love that sort of way that there is this connection in that story, and she brings that out with what Laura said.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think the whole anthology too, as you reflect on your own connection to the natural world, but also to this feeling of this wisdom and history that's passed down from human to human and from different cultures as well, all around the world, about winter and how to weather it,
yes,
how to survive it.
Yes.
You feel this kind of ancient lineage and connection.
Absolutely.
Which I think is very special
it's
too.
Touching too, isn't it?
It is, and I found that quite a sort of moving aspect of the book as well. But thank you so much for your message, and
thank you.
So glad you enjoyed it. And thank you to everyone who read along with us this month, and extra big thanks to those readers who sent in a voice message. Next month, as has been announced for a while, we're reading The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis for our December discussion, which I'm really looking forward to.
Me too.
A real childhood classic and favourite.
Yes.
So we're looking forward to that. And then I'm also announcing January's choice, which is The Morval Hours by Catherine Swift. I'll update the Comfort Book Club website page once I can, but so you know, this will be the January choice. So looking forward, this is another non-fiction book, but a favourite of both of ours.
Yes, and a lovely one, I think, to start in January.
Yes, I agree. Do read along with us for those books too. But thank you so much for watching this video. As always, extra big thanks to those of you who pressed the super thanks button on my last video. I always so appreciate your support. But I hope you've got a wonderful weekend ahead, and I'll see you next Thursday. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.